You're watching Mr. 13 O'Clock, where every story leaves the lights on just a little longer. Tonight, we unlock the rusted doors of forgotten warehouses, where shadows breathe, machines whisper after hours, and something is always watching from the rafters. Hit subscribe if you dare to stay, and drop a comment below. Where in the world are you watching from before the lights go out? The forklift in the exact spot where the old night guard died, but no one had used it in years. The keys were still locked in the supervisor's drawer. The wheels were streaked with fresh grime, and beneath them, a single boot print. No one knew how it got there. No one ever wanted to know. The warehouse was one of those sprawling, forgotten types on the outskirts of a dying industrial district, half abandoned, but still operational enough to avoid inspection. It was called Block 47, part of an old shipping conglomerate that didn't even bother updating the fluorescent lights anymore. Most of them buzzed weakly, casting dull shadows over crates that hadn't been opened in over a decade. Max had only been working there 2 weeks when it started. He was assigned to the midnight shift, along with one other guy, Leon, a grizzled man in his 50s who spoke in half-whispers and didn't believe in eye contact. Leon was a lifer, the kind who knew where every leak in a roof was and which forklifts could stall on command. But even he avoided Bay 3. "Don't go past the orange tape," Leon muttered during Max's second shift. "Even if the scanner pings, they can fix inventory errors in the morning." Max laughed nervously, thinking it was a hazing ritual. But Leon's eyes didn't blink. He just returned to his clipboard and wheeled away. There wasn't much to do between 12 and 4 a.m. The security cams looped. The inventory system lagged. So Max did what most rookies did. He explored. He followed the hum of silence deeper into the aisles, where dust thickened and time seemed slower. That's when he saw it for the first time. A forklift, model 1993, faded yellow with rust-bitten forks, parked just past the line of orange tape in Bay 3. It was completely still, but facing the wrong direction. Max remembered noticing how its tire tracks seemed fresh, etched faintly into the dust, as though it had rolled only minutes ago. Yet no one had passed him in the halls. The night was silent, even for a place like this. He shrugged it off. Maybe someone moved it earlier. Maybe Leon had. But the next night, it was facing a different direction, and the keys were still missing from the ignition. By night 5, Max began to notice a pattern. Every shift, the forklift moved, just a few feet at a time, first facing east, then north. Then it backed into a shelf that hadn't been touched since 2009. When he asked Leon about it, the older man just muttered, "It's still here, huh?" That was all. No explanation. No warning. Just a resigned sigh, like someone watching a bad dream repeat itself. Max couldn't help but obsess. He pulled out the old movement logs from dispatch. Nothing recent, but he noticed something strange. 5 years ago, a forklift of the same model was decommissioned after an incident involving a fallen shelf and a crushed operator. No name was listed. Just a time, 3:13 a.m. On the 7th night, Max stayed late in the break room and watched the warehouse cameras on loop. He narrowed in on Bay 3. For the first few hours, nothing moved. Then at exactly 3:13 a.m., the feed glitched for 2 seconds, and the forklift had shifted 2 feet forward when the screen cleared. No one was near it. No workers. No sados. No movement at all. He rewound the footage 3 times. Same result. The glitch. The shift. That's when he noticed something else. Just before the glitch, the timestamp jumped, not forward but backward by 7 seconds. Just enough to feel like time had rewound, like something inside that frame didn't want to be recorded. He went back to the bay the next day and measured the distance between the wheels. The tracks were different from the night before. Faintly skewed, like the machine had turned just slightly in the dark. Like it was watching something. Max stopped sleeping. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the yellow forklift rolling toward him down an endless warehouse aisle, its headlights off, its engine silent, but still moving. He started documenting it. Took photos, tracked wheel positions, drew crude maps. Every night, it rotated a few degrees closer to the break room. He thought he was going insane until one night, Leon didn't show up. No one could reach him. His locker was still locked. His clipboard sat untouched. The office just assumed he quit. But Max knew better. He remembered the look on Leon's face the last time they spoke. It wasn't anger. It wasn't exhaustion. It was resignation. As if Leon had known this would happen again. 3 nights later, Max heard the beeping. The unmistakable reverse tone of a forklift backing up. But it wasn't scheduled, and he was the only one on shift. He crept toward Bay 3, flashlight in hand, every footstep echoing like it didn't belong to him. When he turned the corner, the sound stopped. There it was. The forklift. Still, facing the break room now. Its forks were raised slightly, something Max hadn't seen before. And in the dust beside it, faint but deliberate, was the outline of a second pair of bare feet. Not boots, not shoes, just feet, as if someone had stepped out from the driver's seat and walked into the shadows. Max ran. He handed in his badge the next morning, didn't ask for his final paycheck, didn't even empty his locker. He never returned a single call. But 3 weeks later, the warehouse posted another job listing for overnight inventory. The ad listed a bonus for operating heavy equipment. Max checked the site again. The model forklift pictured in the header? Yellow. Rusted. 1993. There's a theory in some corners of the internet. Forums buried beneath defunct logistics blogs and ghost hunting subreddits. They say haunted objects don't just repeat, they adapt. That whatever inhabits them learns from each encounter. Changes patterns. Gets smarter. It's not about the forklift itself. It's about the motion. The machine is just the vessel. The motion is the memory. And something or someone still remembers the way home. Footage over a dozen times, frame by frame. The figure standing behind the night guard at 3:09 a.m. wasn't supposed to be there. There was no entry, no exit. And when they froze the tape, the face didn't have any eyes. Warehouse 9 wasn't like the others. Tucked at the far end of an old industrial district, it was technically decommissioned 5 years ago, though decommissioned, in this case, meant they just stopped assigning anyone there. The building still stood. The power still ran. And the security system still operated on its own, quietly logging activity no one ever reviewed, until something made them look. The first clue came from a new hire named Carter. Fresh out of training, he was eager to impress. So when dispatch told him to do a walkthrough of all 13 warehouse units, including the retired ones, he didn't hesitate. It was supposed to be routine. But when he entered Warehouse 9, he didn't radio in for over 10 minutes. When he finally came back on the comms, his voice was clipped, shaky. All he said was, "Don't send anyone else in there." The channel crackled with static, and then silence. Management flagged it as a technical issue. Carter was pulled into a closed-door meeting and reassigned the next day. No one saw him again. The incident might have been forgotten, if not for the motion sensor logs. Warehouse 9 had been registering subtle activity every night at the same time, 3:09 a.m. Just 1 second of motion. Same camera. Same timestamp. For 11 consecutive nights. Still, the system marked it as a glitch until the 12th night, when it lasted 7 full seconds. That was when they pulled the footage. The grainy black and white recording showed the empty corridor of Warehouse 9. Stacked pallets, dust, and silence. Then movement. A figure, tall and completely still, appeared in the far corner of the hallway. Not walking in. Just there. No footsteps. No approach. It stood behind the desk where the guard usually sat. The chair was empty that night. Protocol said the building was off limits. But the presence remained. And then, in the 6th second, its head turned. Not smoothly. Not like a person. It rotated, too far, and snapped to stare directly at the camera. By the 7th second, it was gone. They thought it was a trick of the light, a glitch. So they enhanced the footage. That's when they noticed it wasn't the only time the figure had shown up. The same shape, the same spot, dozens of frames going back years. Almost always in that same timestamp window. But here's where it gets stranger. Cross-checking old reports, they found something odd. Every employee assigned to Warehouse 9 for the past 12 years had either quit abruptly, been reassigned without explanation, or, worst of all, vanished from internal databases altogether. No terminations. No transfers. Just blank fields. Even Carter's name was missing now. His ID badge didn't register in the system anymore. His employee file? Erased. When HR was asked, they claimed no one by that name had ever worked there. But several guards remembered him. He had trained with them, eaten with them in the cafeteria. And then he was just gone. Some began calling the figure the 909 Ghost, a nickname that stuck even though it wasn't 909. But maybe that's how legends start. Wrong details passed around until the lie feels more comfortable than the truth. A senior technician named Morales became obsessed with the footage. He isolated the face, froze the frame, and tried to enhance it. What he found was disturbing. The figure's facial features were off. Too symmetrical. The mouth was a perfect horizontal slit. No contours, no lips. And the eyes, where the eyes should be, were just dark, concave spaces. Not shadows. Not digital noise. Actuelle absence. Like the footage refused to record what was there. He tried printing a still, but every copy came out corrupted. Burnt spots where the face should be. Not just one printer. Every printer in the facility. Morales began sleeping in his office. He claimed the figure had started appearing in other feeds, in buildings 4, 6, even the guardhouse. Brief flashes. Always still. Always watching. His last email was sent to upper management at 3:13 a.m. No subject line. No signature. Just 4 words. It's learning the exits. They found his office door locked from the inside. Lights off. Everything cold. The room was empty. But his badge had been scanned into warehouse 9 minutes before the message was sent. No one saw him after that. At this point, management could no longer ignore the pattern. They ordered all feeds from warehouse 9 be deleted. But the system wouldn't comply. Every time they tried to erase the archives, the console would freeze, flash, and restart, playing that 7-second clip again. The figure, the desk, the slow, unnatural head turn, and the stare. One technician pulled the hard drives, physically dismantling the system. Took it home. Tried to analyze it off-grid. He never made it back to work. When they visited his home, the front door was unlocked. Everything inside untouched, except for his television. It was on, playing static, looping every 7 seconds. They tried boarding up Warehouse 9. But 2 nights later, a different warehouse, #3, reported motion activity at 3:09 a.m. The same figure, same placement. Now, facing a different camera. There's a theory circulating among the old employees. They say the building was never haunted. It was never about Warehouse 9. That was just where it started. It's not a ghost. It's not a person. It's something digital. Something feeding off observation, recognition, surveillance. Every time it's watched, it remembers. Every time it's rewound or enhanced or paused, it grows sharper, clearer, closer. And once you've seen it, really seen it, it knows your face. There's a chilling line from an internal memo, buried in archived security correspondence. It was written anonymously, found and signed in an IT locker. We didn't build these systems to protect ourselves. We built them to open the door. Something came through the feed. Something still watches. Warehouse 9 wasn't shut down. It was sealed. And if that's true, maybe we were never watching the figure at all. Maybe it was watching us. Only supposed to rearrange inventory. But when they moved crate number 42, every light in the warehouse went out at once. And then came the knocking from inside the crate. The warehouse was an old distribution center tucked behind a dead-end access road just outside Columbus, Ohio. Built in the late 70s and repurposed over the decades, it had that haunted industrial silence to it. Concrete walls that echoed too much, long aisles that disappeared into flickering shadows, and corners that always felt like they were watching you back. By 2021, the place was mostly automated, but there were still a few workers who did graveyard shifts for specific tasks. One of them was Jason, a quiet guy in his mid-30s who preferred the solitude of night labor to the chaos of daytime life. He liked the emptiness, the cold, clean hum of the warehouse systems. But there was one thing he hated, crate number 42. It wasn't listed in the digital inventory. Every time he scanned it, the screen would glitch and return a null message. Physically, it was massive, almost the size of a small shed, and wrapped in thick industrial-grade black plastic that had turned dusty and brittle with time. There was no writing on it, no labels. Just a yellowing tag with a number 42 handwritten in red marker. Jason wasn't the first to feel off about it. Workers who had been there longer than him would quietly joke about it or avoid mentioning it at all. They said it had been there since before the current company even bought the place. At first, Jason chalked it up to workplace rumors. Every warehouse has its weird stories. But the unease grew stronger each time he passed it. There was a coldness around it, like walking past a fridge door, slightly ajar but colder. And sometimes he could have sworn he heard a faint ticking. Not mechanical, organic, like knuckles tapping slowly from within wood. Things escalated in late November. Management issued a random overnight inspection, asking for old crates to be moved to make space for new seasonal merchandise. Jason and a temp worker named Logan were tasked with clearing the back quadrant, where crate number 42 had been sitting unmoved, untouched for who knows how long. When the forklift approached it, every overhead light above them started to buzz. Not flicker, buzz. High-pitched and electric, like something humming just beyond the range of human hearing. Jason froze. Logan laughed nervously and tapped the crate with his boot. "Feels empty," he said, knocking again. "Hollow, yes, but not like wood. More like a cavity." Then the building went dark. Total blackout. Emergency lights failed to kick in. The silence was thick, pressing against their ears. Logan swore and turned on his phone flashlight. Jason's had already died, inexplicably. As Logan's beam swept over the crate, both men heard it. 3 slow knocks. From inside the crate. At first they didn't move. They just stood there, paralyzed. Then Logan whispered, "That was you, right?" But Jason shook his head slowly. His mouth was open, trying to form words, but something about the moment had strangled his voice. And then it knocked again, but not in the same spot. This time, it came from the other side. They backed away. Jason tripped over a nearby pallet and scrambled up, heart pounding. He wanted to run, but he also didn't want to turn his back on it. Logan, perhaps braver or just more curious, moved toward the crate again. He ran his hand along the edge of the plastic, feeling for a seam. "I think we should just go," Jason said. But Logan was transfixed. Then the flashlight died, pitch black again. And this time, something exhaled, a deep, slow breath that didn't belong to either of them. It was warm, too close, and came from the direction of the crate. They bolted. They made it to the loading dock and found that none of the exterior doors would open. Locked electronically. No manual obedece. No response from the outside when they called out. It was as if the entire building had sealed them in. And the knocking continued, fainter now, but never stopped. They huddled in the break room for hours until dawn, when the power suddenly returned without warning. The lights flicked back on. The systems rebooted. The doors clicked open. But crate number 42? It was gone. In its place was a perfectly clean square of concrete. No dust, no markings, no scuff from the forklift. Like nothing had ever been there. The logs from that night vanished from the system. No record of the power failure. No record of the inspection order. When they asked management, they were told no such task had been assigned. No one knew who Logan was. He didn't return the next night. Or ever again. Jason, understandably, quit a week later. But he never stopped wondering what had been inside the crate. He started researching the warehouse's history and discovered that the original building had once been a Cold War-era storage facility used by the government. What they stored, no one could say for sure. Records were missing. Some employees who worked there during the transition to a private company claimed there were entire wings that had been sealed off with concrete. One document he found, a scanned facility's blueprint, showed a sub-basement with no stair or elevator access. Just a single square marked Containment Unit 42. It matched the crate's number. Jason's theory? The crate wasn't storing something, it was suppressing it. Something old. Something buried. Something never meant to be moved. And whatever was inside was aware. That ticking sound? He now believes it wasn't mechanical or even random. It was communication. An attempt to keep rhythm. To simulate familiarity. Like mimicking footsteps. Or a heartbeat. A subtle kind of lure. The lights going out? Not random. A protective measure. Maybe. Or a condition of its containment being breached. He believes the building's systems were overridden, not failed, as if something within the crate reached out and disabled them to escape detection. Or worse, to be seen. Because what if it wasn't locked in, but waiting? Crate number 42 wasn't just an old box in the corner of a warehouse. It was a vault, a cocoon, a chrysalis, maybe, and Jason fears that by moving it, they didn't just wake something up, they let it out. Some say that on certain nights, around 3:13 a.m., you can still hear the warehouse alarm tripping, though no one's inside. Sometimes it's followed by the dull, steady sound of knocking. 3 times. Always 3, and always from behind you. It started when Marcus, a temp worker on the overnight shift, took a wrong turn during his first solo inventory sweep. The Crossridge warehouse was a maze. Industrial shelving stacked 3 stories high, echoing metal walls and dim motion lights that flickered on half a second too late. The graveyard shift crew was small, and most kept to themselves, heads buried in scanners and radios, counting crates in near silence. Marcus had been told to check section F12, which he swore was supposed to be next to receiving. But after walking what felt like a full loop, he ended up facing an aisle he'd never seen on the map. There was no sign overhead, just a rusted hook where one might have hung. But there was a handwritten label taped to the nearest shelf edge, a mannequin. Not quite mannequin, not quite anything. He radioed his supervisor, but the signal buzzed and cut off with static. Figuring he'd just logged the aisle manually, Marcus stepped in. The air changed the moment he crossed the threshold. Colder. Still, even the warehouse's low hum, the sound of distant machinery and forklifts, seemed to vanish. He walked past rows of human-shaped figures. Some were armless, some had blank smooth heads. Others had detailed facial features, but their eyes were shut, or so he thought at first. When he passed the 3rd row, one mannequin's eyes were open. Not painted, not sculpted. Open. Marcus blinked. They were shut again. He laughed it off. Probably just sleep-deprived. Maybe the lighting played tricks. He kept walking, weaving through the silent forest of artificial bodies. Each was perfectly still, each facing forward, except when he looked back. Then, without fail, at least one would be facing him. He noticed something else then. Every mannequin had a tag hanging from its wrist, handwritten in thick black ink. First names. Avery, Kyle, Lana, Greg. None repeated. None matched any of the employees he knew, but the names felt real. Familiar in an uncomfortable way, like they belonged to people he'd met in dreams he couldn't quite remember. When he found one labeled Marcus, he stopped breathing for a second. It stood still, expressionless. But it was him. The same height, same build. It wore a navy hoodie, like the one he was wearing right now. He reached out slowly, hesitant to even touch the thing. The plastic was cold. Too cold. The lights flickered above. Then they dimmed. And that's when he noticed something he hadn't before. On the far back wall, a door. Painted the same dull, industrial gray as the rest of the warehouse, but slightly off-center. There was no handle, just a keycard slot. And below it, a small plaque, nearly obscured by dust. Emergency containment. Do not unseal. Containment. Not storage. Not quarantine. Containment. As Marcus stared at the door, the sensation of being watched turned unbearable. He turned around. All the mannequins had moved. Every last one now faced him. Their heads tilted, their limbs extended slightly, as if caught mid-step. The air pressed in. The silence became heavy. He backed away, radioing again. Still static. One mannequin in front had its mouth slightly parted. Marcus swore it hadn't before. And inside, deep inside the mouth, there was something dark, organic, like dried tissue. He thought he saw it twitch. He ran. He didn't stop until he collided with one of the forklift operators near Section D. Breathless and pale, he tried to explain what he'd seen. But the operator just looked at him with a strange kind of stillness. Not disbelief, more like recognition. Like he had seen it too, and learned how to talk about it. The supervisor called Marcus into the office an hour later. Told him there was no such aisle. Told him the map was very clear. Suggested maybe he was overwhelmed. Sleep deprived. Offered to cut his shift early. Unpaid if he needed the rest. Marcus insisted on pulling the footage. They humored him, loaded up the cameras, fast-forwarded to the timestamp where he walked into the unknown aisle. He appeared on screen, turning a corner near F12. Then, nothing. He vanished. No aisle. No mannequins. The camera just showed him walk toward a blank wall, then gone. The supervisor leaned back slowly. Didn't say a word. Marcus never returned to the warehouse. But the story didn't end there. 3 weeks later, during a company-wide remodel, Section F12 was scheduled to be cleared for expansion. When the demolition crew arrived, they found something odd. Behind the drywall, perfectly preserved, was a narrow corridor, lined wall to wall with plastic display forms. No aisle. No selvin. Just mannequins. All of them facing the same direction. And in the back, half-sealed behind a concrete slab, was a locked door with the same plaque Marcus described. Emergency containment, do not unseal. The company quietly halted the remodel. That section was written off as structurally unsound. Cameras were never reinstalled there. No further temp workers were assigned to that area. But here's the thing. Over the next several months, workers began reporting misplaced inventory. Scanners picking up strange barcodes that weren't in the system. Names showing up on shift rosters that no one remembered hiring. And once, in the dead of night, a janitor swore he saw a human figure frozen mid-step behind a forklift. Expressionless, unmoving, not breathing. He thought it was a prank. He turned to call out. When he looked back, it was gone. And so was the pallet Jack had been standing next to. What no one could explain, however, was the growing number of missing persons reports tied to short-term employees. Temps who had been assigned only a shift or two. Their names never made it into the system. No payroll record. No emergency contact info. Just a name on a sticker. A sticker found weeks later hanging loosely from a plastic wrist in a sealed aisle that shouldn't exist. One of the last tags found? Marcus. Still hanging from a mannequin that hadn't been there during the last sweep. And this one, this mannequin, had eyes that looked just a little too alive. They were open, and they never blinked. Silence echoes louder in empty spaces. But in the Eastwell Distribution Center, silence was never truly silent. Not after what the overnight crew started hearing on the loading dock. Whispers that didn't belong to anyone on shift, and conversations that continued long after everyone else had gone home. It started on a Tuesday. Ordinary, uneventful. Boxes moved. Inventory logged. Forklifts humming. At 2:13 a.m., the dock cameras glitched just for 3 seconds. When the feed resumed, nothing seemed out of place, except that someone had scribbled the word "listen" in black grease pencil across the shutter door. No one admitted to doing it. Security assumed it was a prank. Maintenance wiped it off, and everyone moved on. But the voices began the next night. Terry, the newest dock associate, was the first to mention it. He said he heard 2 men arguing by bay door 4, loud enough that he stopped his pallet run, thinking a fight was about to break out. But when he rounded the aisle, no one was there. The argument stopped mid-word. He walked the entire perimeter. Nothing. Only the hum of the ceiling fans and the low creak of steel under pressure. He didn't tell anyone at first. Didn't want to be that guy. But the next night, when he heard again, only this time a woman's voice calling, faintly, get out, he told the shift manager. They checked the cameras. Nothing. But his radio shorted out twice that night, and the audio logs captured a strange burst of static at exactly 3:13 a.m., followed by something else, something like slow breathing. No one could explain it. Over the next week, the loading dock atmosphere began to shift. Pallets were found moved, small distances, but always slightly turned, never how they were stacked. The intercom system would crackle on by itself at odd hours, usually between 2 and 4 a.m., playing no music, just static. And always after the intercom died came the voices. They were muffled at first, indistinct, but those who worked alone on the South and started to hear full phrases. Not random words, full conversations. Sometimes arguments, sometimes weeping, but always in the same spot, right where the delivery trucks would back in. One man claimed he heard a child crying under one of the bay ramps. When he knelt to look, the crying stopped, and a single exhale, touched the back of his neck. There was no child. There was no one behind him. But the breath was real enough to fog up his safety goggles. Soon, people started refusing to work the loading dock alone. One veteran worker, Lisa, who'd been at Eastwell for 8 years, said it felt like the building was remembering something. She described walking across the concrete and feeling weight, like she was dragging an invisible presence behind her. That night, she found an old ID badge near the dock's edge. It was sun-bleached, partially melted, and didn't match any employee in the current database. The photo had no name, just a face and wide, unblinking eyes. HR brushed it off, said the badge was probably from a temp long ago. But the next morning, all the bay door timers reset themselves to 3:13 a.m. again. No one knew why. Someone finally looked into the history of the building. Before it was Eastwell Distribution, the site was a military logistics hub during the Cold War. Decommissioned in 1974 after a fire damaged most of the internal storage units. The fire was ruled accidental, but there were whispers in the local archive, rumors of a lockdown gone wrong. One record, barely legible, referenced containment breach, dock access compromised. Whatever that meant, it was buried fast. But the fire didn't just destroy supplies. It supposedly trapped 5 workers inside. Their bodies were never recovered. And according to a local maintenance contractor who worked the site during its renovation, the south dock was poured over in fresh concrete, much thicker than necessary. Some say the dock was never meant to be reopened, but Eastwell did reopen it. And since that expansion, the voices have only grown louder. One night, during a routine inventory sweep, all scanners went dead simultaneously. The emergency lights flickered on, though there was no outage. A strange message flashed on the central terminal for less than 2 seconds. They're still in here. The IT team insisted it was a glitch, possibly a corrupted data script, but couldn't replicate it. Nor could they explain why every outgoing radio call from the dock that night was preceded by 3 seconds of silence and followed by garbled playback that sounded like laughter, low, echoing laughter that faded into static. Workers began requesting transfers off the night shift. One by one, they left. Those who stayed learned to ignore the voices, or pretended to. They kept their headphones in. They didn't make eye contact with the security monitors. And they never opened bay door 7 after 2 a.m., no matter how many times the motion alarm triggered there. Because by now, they understood something wasn't just haunting the loading dock. It was trying to be heard. There's one final detail, often left out of the employee handbook. If you ever visit Eastwell and walk the dock alone, listen carefully. Around 3:13 a.m., just as the building seems to hold its breath, you might hear a voice whisper your name, even if you never told it to anyone, especially then. Warehouses are meant for things, storing, sorting, stacking. But what if there's one item you can't account for? One that doesn't stay where you leave it, and worse, doesn't want to be found. At Wexley Distribution Center, that's exactly what happened. And to this day, no one can explain why pallet 3719B keeps vanishing and coming back changed. It started in October. Not that it matters, but there's something about that month that makes everything colder than it should be, even inside a temperature-controlled facility. Greg, the floor manager, first noticed it. He was strict, methodical, probably the only reason the graveyard shift ran at all. That night, the system flagged a missing item, an entire pallet of unmarked cardboard boxes that had just been scanned into inventory. At first, they chalked it up to human error. Maybe it had been shelved incorrectly. Maybe it was a system glitch. Maybe someone was screwing around. But the warehouse was clean. No errors. No misplaced inventory. No open docks. The cameras showed something else. Pallet 3719B entered receiving at 2:13 a.m. A forklift dropped it in Zone C, as expected. But somewhere between 2:18 and 2:19, the footage stutters, just for a split second, and the pallet is gone. Not lifted, not carried off, just gone. Like a frame was missing. Like reality blinked. They searched for hours. Greg personally reviewed the footage again, this time with the night guard, Marcus. Together, they noticed something else. At the exact moment the pallet disappears, the temperature display on the security monitor spikes. from 61 to 94 degrees. For 1 second, then it drops back. No explanation, no warning alarms. Just 1 second of wrongness. The next night, 3719B returned. No one saw who brought it back. The manifest reappeared in the system at 2:13 a.m., the same time it vanished. But when they opened one of the boxes, it wasn't what they expected. It wasn't electronics. It wasn't merchandise. Inside the sealed box was a smaller, older wooden crate, one that looked like it had been buried and unearthed. It was wet, muddied. The wood was darker than anything that belonged in a modern warehouse. Inside the crate was straw, just straw, and buried in the straw, something odd, an old shipping tag dated March 13th, 1913, addressed to a place that no longer exists, Valewood Asylum, Arkansas. No one on staff had ever heard of it. No record of this shipment existed in the current company archives. And the number on the tag? 3719B. After that, things started getting weirder. Inventory would fluctuate. The system would log items in aisles that had no shelves. Employees complained about disorientation, especially in Zone C. One loader, Sam, said the aisles didn't line up anymore, that the walls felt closer than before, that something was moving just beyond the corner of his eye. No one took him seriously until Sam disappeared. It was Greg who noticed he clocked in, but never clocked out. His badge was found near Zone C, underneath a metal grate that should have been sealed. Security footage again offered nothing. Sam was walking past pallet 3719B, and then the footage cut for a single frame. One moment he's there, the next gone, just like the pallet. Management launched an investigation. OSHA got involved, but nothing concrete was ever found. Eventually, they wrote it off as a freak accident. Probably wandered off. Maybe he quit. Maybe he didn't want to be found. 2 weeks later, a new pallet showed up. No shipping info. No driver signature. Just rolled in during second shift, dropped off at Zone C. The system recognized it instantly. 3719B. But now the boxes weren't sealed. The tops were open, and inside was dirt. Not random. Carefully packed. Black soil, and small white tags buried in each mound. Handwritten, like grave markers. One tag said Sam, 2024. Another said Greg, pending. Greg didn't sleep for 3 days. He even tried to get a transfer. He begged to move to first shift. He offered to take a demotion just to avoid nights. But before any of that could be approved, he was found unconscious beside Zone C. Heart rate spiked, eyes wide open, whispering a date over and over again. March 13th. The same date from the old tag. The same hour. 2 Uhr 13 nachts. They moved Greg to a hospital. He hasn't spoken since. Marcus, the night guard, was the last to see 3719B before it disappeared again. He swore the labels had changed. They were still handwritten, still tucked into the dirt. But one of them said something he couldn't shake. This pallet is not missing. You are. After that night, the warehouse was shut down indefinitely. No explanation was ever released. Employees were reassigned quietly. Some say Zone C was sealed with concrete. Others claim it was restructured entirely. But the odd thing? 3719BS tracking ID still pings active. Only now, it shows up at different distribution centers across the country. Always unlisted. Always unexplained. One former employee claimed to have found the crate years later, buried behind a closed-down fulfillment center in Oregon. Said it was rotted now, half-eaten by time. But inside were new tags. One of them had his name on it, dated for a future year. A year that hadn't come yet. Some believe the pallet isn't an object at all. That it's more like a node, a breach between storage and something else. A rift mislabeled as merchandise. Something that catalogs people the same way we catalog product. First it logs them, then it loses them, then it brings back something else. And maybe that's the scariest part. We think warehouses are full of things. Boxes, equipment, stuff. But what if we've been storing something ancient, something conscious, without ever knowing it? What if 3719B was never a pallet to begin with? What if it was a door, and someone or something was using it to keep track of us? Back in 2018, a distribution center on the outskirts of Spokane, quietly stopped running its third shift. It was a sprawling facility, massive concrete skeletons of steel racks, endless rows of palletized boxes, humming conveyor belts, and the constant blinking of red motion sensors. Warehouse 12 was the furthest from the main hub, technically still part of the property, but separated by a long chain-link fence and an overgrown lot. It had been closed for years, or at least it was supposed to be. That night, the new night supervisor, Marco Alvarez, was told to inspect a failed signal coming from that very warehouse. A minor maintenance ping, one of those easily ignorable red flags that show up in back-end systems. But Marco had a reputation. He was thorough, disciplined, ex-military, the kind of man who wouldn't leave until every door was locked and every checklist signed. The last person to speak to him was a dispatcher named April. She said he radioed in casually. "Looks like a faulty motion sensor in the back corner. I'll reset it and head back." That was at 10:18 p.m. By 11 p.m., he hadn't returned. By midnight, no one could reach him. Security reviewed the footage. Marco is seen walking toward the entrance of Warehouse 12, flashlight in hand. The infrared lens catches his heat signature. He opens the rusted side door, steps inside, and then nothing. No one exits. The interior cameras, which had been dormant for years, mysteriously flickered online. But the feed was off, blurry, distorted. Every 5 minutes, a new glitch, a flicker of movement behind the shelves, something crawling just out of frame, shadows that didn't match the light source. The following morning, a search team combed through the warehouse. No sign of Marco. No signs of struggle. But there was one anomaly, his flashlight. It was found at the exact center of the building, standing upright on the concrete, still glowing. Its battery had been dead for years. The official report claimed that Marco walked off-site, that he had a mental breakdown and abandoned his post. His family denied it. They said he loved the job. He'd even texted his wife a photo of his lunch break earlier that night. He'd packed her favorite, chicken mole and rice. The lunch was found, untouched, still sealed, on the shelf near the old electrical panel. The area he claimed he was investigating. This is where things get stranger. 2 weeks later, another employee, Carlos Mendieta, was caught sneaking into Warehouse 12 after hours. When questioned, he said he was following the humming. According to him, every night since Marco vanished, he heard something vibrating through the pipes. Not a sound exactly, more like a pressure, a frequency that made his teeth hurt. He described it like a whisper from deep underground, almost like someone breathing through the concrete. He wasn't the only one. Maintenance logs revealed 5 separate reports of auditory hallucinations from employees near Warehouse 12. Descriptions varied. Some heard voices, others heard crying. One worker said he heard someone reciting the employee handbook backwards. Eventually, management sealed the warehouse permanently, bolted the doors, shut off power, removed access from the main terminal. But here's the thing. Motion sensors still ping. Randomly. Always at 10:18 p.m. It doesn't happen every night. But when it does, the signal isn't from a rat or a faulty cable. The system logs it as a human-sized presence, exact height, weight, and gait pattern as Marco Alvarez. Almost like he's still doing his rounds. Still checking sensors. Trapped in a loop. Here's what's even more chilling. A month after the warehouse was sealed, a cleaner reported finding wet boot prints leading from Warehouse 12 to the edge of the parking lot. She followed them for exactly 27 feet. Then they stopped. Mid-stride. No smear, no fade. Just an abrupt end, as if the person had evaporated. Psychologists consulted later offered an unsettling theory. Warehouse 12 was designed during a wave of experimental architecture in the late 90s, based on optimization geometry. Instead of right angles and traditional layouts, this warehouse featured spiral pathways, repeated visual patterns, and subtle gradients in ceiling height. Some called it disorienting. Others claimed it had a kind of echo, a layout that didn't just house cargo, but could distort spatial awareness. A psychologist named Dr. Ellen Ruzzi, who studied liminal environments, called it passive confinement architecture. Spaces that seem empty but trap perception. Places that confuse your sense of time and movement until you're not sure how long you've been walking or if you're walking in circles. She believed that environments like Warehouse 12 might interact with vulnerable minds, especially those working night shifts, isolated under pressure. She theorized that it wasn't Marco who got lost inside the warehouse, but that the warehouse had somehow expanded around him. She compared it to being trapped inside a thought. Not a place, but a recursive moment folding in on itself. Another theory suggests Marco stumbled into a maintenance corridor that had been hidden during renovations. An illegal addition, perhaps. Some blueprints of the original structure show a service tunnel beneath the concrete slab, leading to a never-used incinerator room. That tunnel was never found. When the company sold the property in 2020, they gave the new owners strict instructions. Warehouse 12 is to remain sealed permanently. But 3 months ago, a viral TikTok from a group of urban explorers claimed they entered the building. The footage is shaky, mostly darkness. But around the 17-second mark, a voice whispers clearly, "You're late, Alvarez." No one in the group was named Alvarez. And when asked about it later, all of them claimed they never heard the voice in real time. It only showed up in the video. One of them, an audio editor, analyzed the waveform. The voice didn't overlay the recording. It was the recording. They also claimed that the air inside Warehouse 12 was unnaturally cold. So much so that their breath fogged instantly, despite the warm night outside. Their watches lost track of time. Phones glitched. GPS failed. The TikTok was later deleted without explanation. But screenshots remain. In the final frame, barely visible in the far corner of the warehouse, is the silhouette of a man. He's standing with a clipboard in his hand, wearing a reflective vest, right where the faulty motion sensor used to be. The inventory log had entries from a day no one remembered working. It started with one of those cold, humming Monday mornings where the warehouse lights buzzed just a little louder than they should. You know the kind, where the air feels like it's watching you. Devin, a floor supervisor at Shadwell Logistics, was already 2 coffees in when he noticed something off in the system. Roadie inventory had been updated. New pallet numbers, adjusted counts. But no one had accessed that row all weekend. In fact, it was sealed off for maintenance. He called over Carmen, the inventory tech. She double-checked the logs. Her eyes narrowed. These were inputted Sunday night. 3:13 nachts. But look, no employee badge. It's just blank. She turned her screen toward Devin. There it was, a row of data, all stamped at 3:13 a.m. No user. No access badge. No shift assigned. They both paused. 3:13. Not 3 o'clock. Not 3:30. Exactly 3:13 a.m. Devin radioed maintenance to confirm no one had snuck in. The reply crackled. Roadie? Still cordon off. Power's been dead there since Thursday. It should have ended there. A glitch. A bug in the system. But that night, Devin couldn't shake the feeling. Before going home, he walked through Roadie himself. Past the chain-linked barriers. Past the under-maintenance tape. The lights flickered, then dimmed completely. He turned on his phone flashlight. That's when he noticed the pallet tags. Each pallet had been retagged with inventory codes. Freshly printed, barcode stickers still smooth and unwrinkled. But the printer used for those labels was in the lock supply office. He tore off one tag. Underneath, another tag remained, the original. The item didn't match. Something or someone had relabeled them. Wrongly. Quietly. In the dark. The next morning, Carmen wasn't at her station. Her desk light was on, but her chair was empty. Devin found her an hour later, sitting outside the building, white-knuckled and chain-smoking. She didn't speak right away. Finally, she said, "It's not just Row D." She pulled out her phone and showed him. "I set up a hidden admin log. It tracks ghost inputs. Someone's been updating multiple aisles. Always at 3:13 a.m. Different rows every time. And not just items. They're writing things." She zoomed in on one log entry. The field meant for item notes read, "Let us sleep." Another, "We remember the fire." Devin laughed nervously. "Come on, this is a prank." But Carmen didn't laugh. I watched the screen update in real time. My hands weren't on the keyboard. It wrote that by itself. The following night, Devin stayed late with a thermos of black coffee and a clipboard, determined to see it for himself. He stationed himself in the central office, eyes locked on the monitor. Midnight passed. 1 Uhr nachts. Then 2. At 3:13 a.m. sharp, the screen blinked. New entries populated. Row F, pallet 117. It still hurts. Row G, pallet 034. Not buried. Just forgotten. Devin stared in silence. There was no sound. No sign of anyone in the building. Just the rhythmic hum of the servers and that low flickering from the emergency lights. The next morning, Carmen was gone. Not just missing. Her name was gone from the employee database. Her access card no longer worked. Her desk was cleaned out, papers shredded, drawers empty. The only sign she'd ever existed was a single sticky note left on her monitor. Stop counting them. Devin tried to bring it up to management. They waved him off. System glitch, they said. Nothing unusual. One supervisor even laughed and said, "You know how old buildings are. Stuff resets at weird times." But he knew better. He'd gone back through years of archives. And there it was. The 313 anomaly. Every quarter. Every few months. Tiny, irregular entries made at the same time. On the same rows. Always at 3:13 a.m. Going back decades. Long before the current system. Before digital logs. He dug deeper. There had been a fire. Back in 1987. An accident in the chemical storage section. No survivors. 3 warehouse staff had been trapped behind a collapsed aisle. Crates had blocked the exit. They suffocated before anyone could reach them. Their names weren't listed on any employee memorial. The report was sealed by the company. Internal records showed they were hired as temporary help. No paper trail. No families contacted. No closure. Devin felt sick. He returned to Row D that night with a portable scanner. Every box. Every pallet. He scanned them one by one. Hidden in the metadata of one container was an untagged line. You stacked the boxes too high. The following day, he received an anonymous email. No subject. No sender. The body simply read, "Stop before it starts counting you." That night, he disconnected the main inventory terminal at 3:10 a.m. At 3:13 a.m., the unplugged monitor turned itself on. The screen was blank, then flickered. A single line appeared. "Welcome, Devin." The input field opened. The cursor blinked. Item code. Name. Cause. And then the final field. Location you. He slammed the screen off and ran. Past Row D. Past the forklift lanes. Past the walls that hummed too loud. But something had shifted. The next morning, a new log entry was found. Row X. Pallet 000. One more to remember. Devin never returned to work. But each night, at 3:13 a.m., the logs continue to update. They're counting. Not products. Not shipments. Names. Red light means danger. In most cases, it's a warning. But deep inside a defunct food warehouse in Ohio, the red light never turns off. It glows inside a cold storage unit that hasn't been used in over a decade. Locked from the outside, frostbitten, and utterly silent. No one remembers installing it. And no one can explain why it pulses like a heartbeat. Marcus Delgado had only been working security at the Winston Logistics Depot for a month when he noticed it. The warehouse was old, built in the late 70s, and had undergone so many expansions and closures that entire wings of it felt like tombs. Dusty aisles of unused pallets, broken down forklifts, and forgotten shipment crates stretched into darkness. But Bay D, where the cold storage was housed, was always colder than the rest. Not just by degrees, but by something else, something you could feel in your spine. Marcus had been doing his rounds at 2:46 a.m. when he noticed the red glow through the frosted window of the cold storage door. At first, he thought it was just a faulty alarm light. But when he checked the control panel, nothing was powered. The unit was supposed to be shut down. Disconnected years ago. The red light was inside. He radioed it in. Dispatch told him it was probably a battery-powered indicator left behind. He should ignore it unless there were signs of entry. But Marcus couldn't shake it. The light wasn't steady. It pulsed, slow, rhythmic, like a human heart under a layer of ice. He returned the next night with a coworker, Tim, who had worked there longer. When Marcus pointed out the red light, Tim froze. "That's not possible," he muttered. Marcus asked what he meant, but Tim only shook his head and walked off. He avoided Bay D for the rest of the night, wouldn't talk about it again. 2 days later, Tim called off indefinitely. Word spread that he was taking leave for stress-related health issues. It might have ended there, but Marcus couldn't let it go. He started reviewing the security footage, cycling through overnight recordings of Bay D. Most showed nothing. But on October 3rd, at exactly 3:13 a.m., a figure appeared near the cold storage door. It wasn't a worker. It wore no reflective vest. It didn't walk, more like glided across the cement floor, barely touching it. Then the footage skipped, jumped several seconds forward, and the red light, which hadn't been there before, was suddenly glowing behind the frosted glass. When Marcus tried to rewind and rewatch the moment it appeared, the footage glitched every time. He brought it up with management. They dismissed it, said the cameras were outdated. Compression artifacts. Power surges. He tried to forget it, but every night the light returned. Same pulsing rhythm. Same impossible presence. Then things got worse. On November 12th, Marcus responded to a motion alert in Bay D. But when he arrived, nothing was there. Only the red light, glowing steadily. Yet when he turned to leave, he heard footsteps behind him. Soft, barefoot. And when he turned back, the cold storage door had unlatched itself. Slightly ajar. The interior should have been pitch black, disconnected from power. But the red glow bled out like fog. Marcus approached, radio trembling in his hand. He called out, but no echo responded. Only a distant wheezing sound like breath on cold glass. He shut the door. After that night, his dreams began to change. He'd wake up cold, as if he'd been sleeping in a freezer. He'd hear soft knocks on his apartment door at 3:13 a.m., always 3 knocks. But when he checked, no one was there. And sometimes, his hallway light would flicker red just before it burned out. He finally cornered one of the oldest warehouse staff, Lou, a forklift operator who'd been around since the early 90s. Lou looked uncomfortable when Marcus brought up Bay D. That unit wasn't part of the original building, Lou said. It was added after the acquisition in '97. Private contractor came in. No one local. Big hush-hush operation. Marcus asked why it was sealed off. Lou hesitated. Something went wrong. When pressed, Lou only said this. They stored something in there that never should have been frozen. Some kind of organic shipment. After that, we started losing people. Guys would disappear on night shift. One said he saw someone crawling on the ceiling. Another quit after he heard whispers in the vent. Management covered it all up. Shut the unit. Well, did it shut, even? But the red light, that never stopped. Marcus couldn't ignore it anymore. He returned to Bay D1 last time, armed with a flashlight, bolt cutters, and a body cam. If something was in there, he needed to see it for himself. He arrived at 2:55 a.m. The corridor leading to the cold storage seemed darker than usual. The warehouse's distant hum was gone. Even his footsteps felt muted. When he reached the door, the red light was waiting. The latch was already unlocked. As he stepped inside, frost licked at his skin. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe. And yet, it wasn't silent. Something was whispering, not in a language, but in sound. A vibration deep in his skull, like tuning forks pressed against his bones. He swept the flashlight across the unit. At first, nothing. Just rows of empty racks. But then the light landed on something at the far end. A crate, still sealed. Covered in ice. The red glow was coming from within it. He approached. The whispering grew louder, more urgent. Not angry, just pleading, begging. As if whatever was inside didn't want out. It wanted to be seen. He raised his flashlight again, and the light flickered out. For 2 full seconds, Marcus stood in total darkness. The only light was the pulsing red glow, now blinking faster. Closer. Then he heard breathing. Not his own. When the flashlight clicked back on, the crate was open. Empty. And across the frost-covered wall, something had been scrawled. Letters jagged and raw, as if etched by bone. Warmth is the lie. Marcus fled. The footage from his body cam cut out at 3:13 a.m., just as he crossed the threshold of the unit. He never returned to work. 2 weeks later, his apartment was found abandoned. No sign of struggle. No sign of him. Only the hallway light still burned, faintly red. They kept clocking in, but there were no records of them ever clocking out. No pachiks, no employee files, just faded names on lockers. In a break room no one was allowed to enter after midnight. It started when Martin transferred to a regional distribution warehouse on the edge of the industrial zone. It was one of those facilities that stretched for acres, with rows of forklifts, rattling conveyor belts, and the ever-present hum of artificial lights that never shut off. Management sold the transfer as a promotion. Better pay, quieter nights. But they never mentioned why the position was always open. Martin's first night fell off before it even began. The security guard at the front, a gaunt older man with sunken eyes, didn't ask for ID. Just nodded once and muttered, "Don't go near Bay 3 after 2 a.m. Martin laughed, thinking it was some kind of hazing. The guard didn't. The warehouse ran 3 shifts. First and second were standard, buzzing with workers loading freight, managing logistics, sorting crates. But the third shift, the one Martin had joined, was different. Sparse. Only a handful of people on the schedule, and even fewer ever seen. His first few nights were uneventful, almost eerily so. Tasks were automated. His supervisor, a woman named Claire, communicated only via email, never face-to-face. The others on shift, 2 men and a woman, kept to themselves. No chit-chat, no greetings. Their eyes always looked just past Martin, as if they saw something behind him that he couldn't. He started noticing little things. Lights flickering in parts of the warehouse that were supposed to be sealed. Movement on the security cameras. Forklifts drifting forward without a driver. Crates shifting places with no one near them. One night, while doing rounds, he walked past a row of tall shelving units and clearly heard someone whisper his name. But when he turned, it was just cold air and humming fluorescence. Then came the locker room incident. Martin stayed late one night, past the usual end of third shift. Around 6 a.m., while changing, he noticed something odd. His locker number was 371. On the wall opposite, there was a row marked for third shift workers, 372 through 378. But each locker had a nameplate, scratched, faded, barely legible. Curious, he jotted them down and brought them up to HR the next day. The woman behind the desk blinked. "None of these are current employees," she said. "In fact, they haven't worked here in over 15 years. Martin laughed. "Then why are their names still on the lockers?" The woman didn't smile. "Because no one's ever been able to open them. Maintenance tried. They're stuck. Welded shut, maybe. We just leave them alone." Back at work, Martin started asking questions. Who were these people? Why were there no records of them being terminated, relocated, or even deceased? He was met with cold stares, shoulder shrugs, or warnings cloaked as jokes. "You ask too many questions for someone working graveyard," one co-worker said, not looking up from his clipboard. The dreams started the following week. In them, Martin stood in the center of the warehouse, but it was empty, silent. Even the humming stopped. Shadows stretched from impossible angles, and in every dream, a single intercom speaker would crackle to life and say the same words. "Third shift isn't over until you forget." He'd wake up drenched in sweat, unsure if the sound of forklift horns outside his window was real or remembered. One night, unable to shake the unease, Martin returned to Bay 3. It was sealed, cordoned off by yellow caution tape and a rusted chain. The sign read, "Out of order, structural instability." But the tape was old, curling at the edges, and the lock on the chain had long since rusted through. Inside, the air was heavier, like something old lived in the walls. The bay was cavernous, filled with long-forgotten crates stamped with outdated logos. In the far corner, beneath a tarp, was a large control panel, an old-time clock, the analog kind with punch cards. Curious, Martin flipped a switch. The machine sputtered to life. A row of punch cards ejected, one by one, as if waiting to be read. Each card had a name, the same names from the sealed lockers. Each card was stamped in, none stamped out. He backed away, heart pounding. That's when he saw them. 7 figures, standing perfectly still among the crates. Pale, still, dressed in old warehouse uniforms. They didn't move, didn't breathe, but their eyes were open, frozen, watching. Martin bolted, fleeing down the aisle, but the warehouse twisted behind him. Pads closed, crates rearranged, forklifts blocked exits. It was as if the building knew he wasn't supposed to be there. He burst into the main hall, breathless. Behind him, the intercom crackled. "Clock out, Martin." The next morning, everything looked normal. Bay 3 was sealed again. The time clock on. HR claimed there was never a Bay 3 assigned for third shift. The security guard was gone. And Claire, the email-only supervisor, no longer responded. Martin submitted his resignation the next day. But no one responded. His paycheck stopped. His employee badge stopped working. But every night at 11:58 p.m., his name appeared on the punch-in logs. Even now, he tried moving, changing his number, destroying his ID. But the calls still come. The emails, the dreams, the low hum of a warehouse that should be miles away, but somehow still follows him. Sometimes he sees them in crowds. 7 figures, motionless, watching, waiting, reminding him the third shift doesn't exist, but it's still on the schedule. And once you're on it, you never really clock out. It only goes down once. That's what the old-timers whispered when they passed by the rusted freight elevator at the back of the warehouse. One trip down and that was it. No one who ever rode it came back up. But the records showed no deaths. No missing person reports. Nothing that would raise a flag. The elevator simply existed, and no one could explain why it still ran. Mark had only worked at North Lane Distribution for 3 weeks when he first noticed the door. It wasn't on the warehouse floor plan. Wedged between 2 loading bays, its frame was sealed with riveted steel, and a faded sticker above it read, "Freight, BSMT." The keypad next to it was dead. No lights, no beeps. But sometimes, late in the shift, Mark heard a hum. Not move hum, as if something deep beneath the warehouse was breathing through it. At first, he chalked it up to old machinery or air compression. This place was a relic. Pipes clanged, lights flickered, and the HVAC system whined like a dying animal. But then he noticed how people behaved around it. Veteran workers never stood near the elevator. Pallets were stacked deliberately to block it. Forklift routes were diverted to avoid its area. And no one ever mentioned it aloud. Mark asked Shelley, a floor manager who had been there 14 years. She looked startled, like he'd said something offensive. "You knew," she said carefully. "Just do your routes and clock out. Some doors don't open to places. They open to moments you can't undo." It felt theatrical. Mark thought she was messing with him. But that night, he stayed past closing just to see if the elevator would move. At 3:13 a.m., it did. The panel lit up, flickering orange, and the heavy doors creaked open with a sigh of stale air and dust. There was no sound of cables, no vibration, just a yawning black shaft lit by a single flickering bulb overhead. The elevator itself looked untouched. Chrome railings, spotless floor, and a set of mismatched buttons. G, 1, 2, and B. There was no B on any of the warehouse documentation. No subleves. But there it was. The door stayed open too long. Long enough to feel like it was waiting for him. Mark didn't step in. He walked away fast, heart pounding, ears ringing. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Shelley wouldn't meet his eyes. "You stayed, didn't you?" she asked. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. That night, he told himself he'd imagined it. Sleep deprivation. Stress. Maybe an old system glitch. But part of him was already curious. The kind of curiosity that doesn't fade, it builds. Eats at the edges of thought until it becomes a need. The following weekend, he returned with a flashlight and a small handheld camera. No one would know. If the elevator opened again, he'd document it. Prove to himself it was just forgotten infrastructure. At 3:13 a.m., the doors opened. Again, no noise, no footsteps, just a vacant elevator bathed in dim, unnatural light. The air that spilled out was dry and heavy, like the air inside long-sealed tombs. He stepped in. The doors shut the instant both feet touched the floor. No button had been pressed. No signal given. The elevator began to descend, silently, smoothly. No numbers lit up on the panel. It was like falling without motion. The walls seemed to stretch slightly, subtly, like they were pulsing, breathing. The descent lasted too long, far longer than any basement should have required. When it stopped, the doors didn't open. They simply vanished. 1 second, they were there. The next, just an open void into something impossible. What lay beyond wasn't a basement. It wasn't a room. It was a corridor that stretched in both directions infinitely, lined with hundreds of doors, all identical. Each was labeled in handwriting etched into rusted metal plates. Some names were legible. Others were scratched out. One read, Mark Fenley. That was his name. The flashlight flickered. The camera refused to power on. He reached out to touch the plate. It was warm. And then he heard it. The freight elevator returning. The groan of cables. The whine of machinery. The sound of something leaving without him. Mark spun around, sprinted toward the shaft, but it was sealed. No elevator. No opening. Only smooth, blackened concrete. The kind that absorbs sound. And he wasn't alone. He didn't see it at first. Just felt it. The cold presence that settles in your back teeth and spine. Then the doors along the corridor began to creak. Slowly, one by one. They didn't open all the way. Just enough to reveal slivers of movement. Figures. Watching. Waiting. Whispers followed. Barely audible. Not language. More like memory leaking into his ears. He stepped back, heart clawing at his ribs. His own door was now open. Light flickered inside. A room. Familiar. His childhood bedroom. But time was wrong. The posters were reversed. The windows showed stars he didn't recognize. And on the bed sat himself. Younger. Much younger. The boy looked up. Pale. Hollow-eyed. I never left, the boy said. Mark turned and ran. The corridor didn't end. At some point, the flashlight blinked out. He ran until his breath burned and the muscles in his legs screamed. Eventually, he collapsed. When he woke up, he was lying on the warehouse floor. Daylight streamed in from the high windows. Pallets surrounded him. The elevator was sealed again, cold and lifeless. He didn't speak about it. Not at first. But small things had changed. People spoke to him like they hadn't seen him in weeks. His time card showed a 2-week gap. His locker was empty. And worst of all, he couldn't find himself in the employee database. He tried to quit, but his emails bounced. HR didn't respond. The guard at the gate wouldn't let him leave the premises without proper clearance. He was wearing his badge. It didn't scan. That night, he slept in the break room. The elevator began humming again at 3:13. It does that now, every night, but Mark doesn't go near it. He can't, because something followed him back. It watches from reflections, polished metal, puddles, the screens of powered-off monitors. It doesn't mimic. It remembers. And sometimes in those reflections, it blinks when he doesn't. And every night at 3:13, the elevator waits again. The panel lights up. They sealed off Bay 6 without explanation. No one was allowed in or out. Not after the noises started. Low, wet sounds that echoed through the steel walls like something breathing just beneath the concrete. It had been dormant for almost 3 months. Quiet. Forgotten. Then, on a Tuesday night, the cameras started glitching again. And the air inside Bay 6 dropped to near freezing. The warehouse belonged to a mid-sized logistics company just outside Tulsa, the kind that handles overflow freight for larger corporations. Rows of identical bays lined the backside of the building, used for loading and unloading trucks. Bay 6 wasn't any different, at least not at first. Before it was sealed, Bay 6 was used to store unsorted pallets that came in mislabeled. But even back then, employees complained about it. They said the shadows didn't move right in there, that it smelled like stagnant water and burnt plastic. Maintenance blamed the drain in the back, said it was just runoff from the refrigeration line above. But it got worse. Forklifts would stall at the threshold of Bay 6. One driver swore his machine lost all hydraulic pressure the second he crossed the yellow safety line. When he reversed out, everything worked again, instantly. He refused to go back, said he felt like something was pressing down on his chest inside. Then came the animal reports. Workers started finding dead birds near the loading dock entrance to Bay 6. Not killed violently, just collapsed, like they'd suffocated mid-flight. One guy, Rico, picked up a sparrow that had fallen from the upper rafters. He said its eyes were gone. Not injured, just missing, like they'd been dissolved. Management brushed it off. They always do at first. Don't sensationalize it, the site's supervisor said. We got enough turnover without ghost stories. But something had changed in Bay 6. They started losing inventory. Pallets logged into the system would vanish, only to be found days later, perfectly intact, behind stacks of boxes that weren't there the night before. Some employees joked that the bay had a hunger, that it swallowed things it liked and spit out the rest. Then the new guy, Alex, went in. He was a temp, eager to impress. Didn't know the rumors, didn't care about the signs. They asked him to do a floor check in Bay 6 before closing. Inventory discrepancy. He scanned his badge, opened a roll-up door, and walked inside. He didn't come out for 20 minutes. The line supervisor thought he'd just gotten lost in the pallet maze again. It happened. But when she called his radio, there was no answer. She went in after him. The door slammed shut behind her. She found Alex near the back wall, standing perfectly still, facing away. The scanner light was blinking on the floor, abandoned. He didn't speak when she called to him. When she stepped closer, she realized he was shaking. Not like he was cold, but like he was holding back something. Terror, maybe, or a scream. When she reached out to touch him, he finally turned and said something that made her freeze. It watches you through the cracks. They both left Bay 6. She pulled him out by the wrist, locked the door behind them, and flagged the shift manager. Alex wouldn't explain what he meant. He just kept asking if there were cameras in the bay, and if so, how long they recorded. Security pulled the footage the next morning. At 2:37 a.m., the feed jumped like the signal had been pushed off frequency. Then it focused just long enough to capture something moving behind the stacked pallets. It was low to the ground, thin, loping, almost like it was crawling, but not with human limbs. There were no identifying features, just the suggestion of movement where there should have been stillness. After that night, Alex didn't return. His agency said he stopped answering calls, moved back in with his family. Rumor was he started sleeping in a room with no windows, covered the mirrors, refused to use his phone. 2 weeks later, they sealed Bay 6. Plastic sheeting, zip ties, hazard tape. They made up a story about a chemical leak, but everyone who'd been there that night knew better. The temp badge logs were deleted. Cameras turned off. It was like they were trying to forget it ever happened. But something strange kept happening. Every Tuesday at exactly 3:13 a.m., the lights in the control room dimmed for 4 seconds. Only 4. Just long enough to flicker like a pulse. No power surge. No fault in the line. And only on Tuesdays. People whispered that it was when it moved. There was talk of an old maintenance report, buried deep in the archives, mentioning strange readings in Bay 6 from years before the company bought the property. One tech wrote that the floor had an unusual composition, something about layered concrete, with a seam in the sublevel that didn't match the original blueprints. Almost like the bay had been built over something, or to keep something in. There was no basement access on any maps. But one of the older night guards swore that when the bay was first reopened for expansion, he saw men in white suits and sealed helmets go in and come out 3 hours later, visibly shaken. He wasn't on the schedule after that week. Some believe whatever's in Bay 6 isn't physical, that it's an echo, some fragment of something that got caught in the structure itself. Others think it's alive, that it feeds on patterns, time, routine, that it waits for silence, then moves. Employees still avoid the far corridor, even though Bay 6 is sealed. They say you can feel something if you get too close. A pressure in your ears, like the air is watching you back. One shift leader claims she saw condensation form on the outside of the sealed door. But it was winter. There shouldn't have been any humidity in the air. She wiped it clean and saw something written in the fog metal. 4 digits. 313. That was last week. And last night, a new pallet showed up in Bay 5. It wasn't logged. No labels. Just shrink-wrapped in black film. The warehouse lead ordered it moved to quarantine. But when the forklift driver passed Bay 6, The pallet jack suddenly lost power. The plastic had been torn open, and the inside was empty, except for a badge. It belonged to Alex, and it had a new scan-in timestamp burned into the back. 3:13 nachts. New hires never to go near Bay 3 after midnight. Not because of safety codes or forklifts or anything logical, but because of a door. A door that isn't connected to any office, no room, no hallway. Just a door bolted into a bare concrete wall. And according to the warehouse logs, it doesn't exist. The first report came from a third-shift temp named Hugo. He clocked in at 11 p.m. like usual, did his inventory walk, and by 2:45 a.m., he noticed something strange, an unnatural silence near Bay 3. No echo of footsteps, no buzz of motion sensors, even though the area was always active at night with automatic systems. He walked past the refrigerated units, turned the corner toward the far wall, and stopped. There it was, a single black industrial door. Matte finish, solid steel, with no handle. Just a metal slot near the bottom like a mail chute, and a blinking red indicator above it that pulsed once every 3 seconds. No one had seen that door before. Not in any of the shift rotations, not during the daylight walkthroughs, not even on the facility blueprints. At exactly 3:13 a.m., Hugo heard a sharp click. Then the door creaked open just an inch. What he saw, or thought he saw, was impossible to describe. Not because it was violent or grotesque, but because his brain simply couldn't process it. He backed away slowly as something moved in that narrow opening, a slow, unnatural glide, like a shadow underwater. Not fast, not threatening, but aware. By morning, Hugo quit. He didn't ask for his last paycheck. The company buried the incident, called it a stress-related hallucination. But then it happened again, and again, always at 3:13 a.m., always in the same unmarked space behind Bay 3. Other workers started whispering about it, not in a fun, urban legend way, but like it knew they were talking. Some began to notice missing time on their logs. A few said they'd black out between 3:12 and 3:14 and wake up feeling nauseous, like they'd just come out of deep anesthesia. One janitor found a perfectly straight line of dead insects along the wall where the door appeared. Ants, roaches, even a bat, all completely intact, all facing the same direction, as if they'd stopped mid-motion and watched. Here's where things get unsettling. The security cameras never captured anything. At 3:13 a.m., every camera near Bay 3 glitched for exactly 4 seconds. Not before, not after. Always 4 seconds. Long enough for the door to open. Just long enough for something to pass. An independent inspector was brought in. A structural analyst named Mayfield. Smart guy. He brought ground-penetrating radar to scan the wall. What he found was impossible. According to the radar, the wall wasn't solid. It was hollow. But not a normal hollow space. It was a shape, like an elongated oval chamber about 6 feet tall, with grooves etched inside. When he tried to rescan, the radar shut down completely. Battery fried. Never turned back on. Mayfield left that night, never filed his report, and was found weeks later in a different state, speaking incoherently about machinery inside bone. Then came the incident with Riley. Riley was known for being a skeptic, loudly so, called the whole thing a warehouse myth cooked up by bored night shifters. He even brought a camera and set it up facing the wall. Set the timer for 3:10 a.m. The footage? Cut to static at 3 hours 12 minutes and 59 seconds and resumed at 3 hours 14 minutes and 10 seconds. A minute and 11 seconds gone. But Riley wasn't. He was found sitting on the floor, facing the door, eyes wide open, unmoving. Not catatonic, just still. When co-workers shook him, he blinked and asked why everyone was yelling. Said he'd only been sitting for like 10 seconds. His watch, 3 hours and 13 minutes, frozen. So what is the door? Some theories suggest it's a psychological anomaly. Something about circadian rhythms, long hours, and industrial lighting triggering a shared delusion. But that doesn't explain the synchronized electrical failures. It doesn't explain the identical timestamps. And it certainly doesn't explain the odor. Yes, the odor. Multiple people described it independently. A sweet, almost floral scent mixed with copper and mold. Familiar but wrong. Like a memory of a room you've never actually been in. Others think it's spatial, that the door leads to a pocket of reality out of sync with ours. A fracture in architecture, a place where time dilates, logic folds in on itself, and consciousness can't follow. Then there's the theory buried in an old file marked Q3-1987 incident report. The report is mostly redacted, but one phrase is legible. Maintain 313 protocol. Do not open unless signal is received. Unstable. Listening. Listening. The warehouse was built over an older facility, something Cold War era. Blueprints show an underground level that was never completed. According to some urban explorers, there's a sealed sub-basement that predates the current structure by at least 40 years. Rumors say it was part of a psychological study. Something about sensory deprivation. Echo chambers. Rotating doors with no destination. One retired foreman claimed he once saw the door open all the way. He said it was full of mirrors, endless mirrors, but they didn't show your reflection. They showed a version of you that hadn't blinked yet, like it was waiting. He was later hospitalized for a nervous breakdown. Before he lost speech, he repeated one sentence. You don't go through the door. It goes through you. Since then, management pretends the wall is solid. They've repainted it 3 times, installed a rack of boxes in front of it. But workers still report the faint click at 3:13 a.m., still feel the pressure change, still smell that strange floral decay. And sometimes, rarely, someone finds the boxes move just slightly, as if something came out and forgot to put everything back the way it was. People wonder why the door appears at that specific time. Why 3:13? Some say it's just an inversion of bad luck, 13 minutes past 3, an hour often linked with hauntings. Others think it's mechanical, a schedule, a breach that cycles like clockwork. But maybe it's none of that. Maybe the door isn't opening. Maybe it's waking up. And the only thing worse than what's behind the door is what happens when it decides to leave it open.